For some, the idea of an incestuous relationship is a bit icky. But for most of us, however, it's downright disgusting. But this hasn't always been the case. You see, when you're a royal, you can't just go around watering down your nobility by mixing with the filthy peasants. Oh no, that'd be ludicrous. And for some rulers, even the blood of other nobles wasn't quite blue enough for their liking. So, what's a member of the royal family to do? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You start porking your own family. What else can one do? It's better to shag your sister or be boned by your brother than to have those peasants piss in your gene pool. At least that was the thinking for many ruling families throughout history. But there is one family that took this to the extreme. One family with a litany of recessive genes large enough to destroy an entire empire. I think it's time we introduce these mother marriers, these father philanderers. This is the most inbred family ever. The Habsburgs. So, inbreeding. Let's talk about it. What is it? Well, inbreeding is when two closely related people or animals reproduce over multiple generations. And incest is more so the actual act of two closely related people or animals engaging in sexual intercourse. Basically, you do enough incest over a few generations and your descendants will be inbred. Why is this a big deal, I hear those from Alabama asking? Well, without diversity, the gene pool becomes shallow. So shallow in fact, the next generation to dive in are more likely to smack their face on the bottom than to swim to genetic safety. This is because without a lifeguard to top up the gene pool with some genetic diversity, the same genes are used over and over again. Now, overlapping genes aren't always bad. If both your parents have blue eyes, chances are you will too. If both of your parents are tall, chances are you will be tall too. But in some cases, overlapping genes can have terrible consequences. Imagine if both of your parents had a rare genetic disorder, or God forbid, they were both ginger. You'd have a pretty high chance of that being passed on to you. But what if they were colourblind? What if you lived on an island where most people were colourblind? That's exactly what happened to the island of Penglap. Penglap is a small atoll consisting of 3 islands connected by a shallow reef located in the Pacific Island, and inhabited by around 250 residents. Complete achromatopsia, or colourblindness for us regular folks, is normally very rare, but due to a catastrophic typhoon in 1775 that devastated the population, leaving only around 20 survivors, this island lost its much needed genetic diversity. This is known as the founder effect, where a population descends from only a handful of ancestors, and in this case, it is thought to have been, sorry for this pronunciation, Dokisa Wana-Nished, the ruler at the time, who is believed to have been a carrier of this specific underlying genetic condition. This led to total absence of working cones in the eye retinas, leaving them with only rods and ultimately unable to see colour. However, this small Pacific island is not the only place to have their genetics wildly skewed by an isolated population. From an island of people that couldn't see colour to a family that could change colour, the Blue family of Kentucky are the real-life Smurfs, albeit normal human size and not being hunted for their magic by Gargamel. They did, however, live in a forest far away from the rest of human society. The story of the Blue Fugate family of Troublesome Creek began when Martin Fugate and Elizabeth Smith married and started their family. Both Martin and Elizabeth looked completely normal to anyone that saw them, and Elizabeth was even said to be as pale white as a mountain laurel that blooms every spring around the creek hollows. However, under the surface lied a secret unbeknownst to these soon-to-be parents. Somehow, against all odds, both carried the recessive gene that would lead to 4 of their 7 children being born with blue skin. This was during the 1800s, in rural eastern Kentucky, a time and place lacking roads and railroads. The family was isolated, so without many options, the family decided to marry amongst themselves, raising the number of people carrying the recessive gene and ultimately increasing the levels of blue skin within their community. After generations of interbreeding, some of the families started to resent their certain shade of cyan. Not only did their blue skin make them stand out, but it also served as a constant reminder of their family's history of inbreeding. It was in the face of this adversity that 2 of the Fugates would approach Kaywin, a hematologist at the University of Kentucky's medical clinic, in hopes of finding a cure. They were really embarrassed about being blue, Kaywin remembers. Patrick was hunched down in the hall, Rachel was leaning against the wall. They wouldn't come into the waiting room. You could tell how much it bothered them to be blue. Kaywin compiled research of other isolated populations and discovered the Fugate family had a rare hereditary blood disorder causing high levels of methemoglobin in their blood. Methemoglobin is a non-functional blue version of the regular red hemoglobin protein that carries oxygen. The red hemoglobin of blood in most bodies shows through the skin, giving it a pink hue, but the blue methemoglobin in the Fugate's blood turned their skin blue. Surprisingly, the cure for this was more blue. Methyl blue dye to be more specific. The dye would activate the body's ability to convert methemoglobin to hemoglobin. After only a few minutes, the researchers saw the blue tone of the fugate skin fade before their very eyes, and if they continued to ingest this substance on a regular basis, they would be able to lead a normal life. If only there was a cure as simple for the genetic train wreck we know as the Habsburg family. Marriage amongst the great royal families of Europe wasn't exactly uncommon. This was a way to make alliances and consolidate power between families. However, there's a bit of a problem with this. You see, there's only a handful of royal families to choose from. Chances are, someone's going to end up courting a cousin. And if this is continually done over multiple generations, you get a family like the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs would rule in and around the Holy Roman Empire from about the 15 to 1900s and produce kings of Bohemia, Hungary, Croatia, Spain, and Portugal. But this would all come to an end with the advent of the World Wars that put an end to much of Europe's imperial conquest. In 1496, one wing of the Habsburg family married into the ruling family of Spain. The leader of this offshoot was Philip I, who married Joanna of Castile and promptly decided the best way of keeping this position of power for his family was simple: intermarriage. That's right, keeping it in the family was the best way to keep it in the family. This continued for over 200 years, and by this time the genetic lifeguard was off duty and the Habsburgs were drowning in a pool of recessive genes. One genetic abnormality stood out above all others: an elongated jaw that later became known as the Habsburg jaw. The jaw would extend out much further than most people's, and this was usually accompanied by large bulbous lips, and in some cases this could severely affect the ability to speak or even eat. But this was only the defects you could see from the surface. Beneath their monstrous looks lied a litany of genetic errors. This long line of inbreeding came to an end with Charles II, son of Philip IV. Charles was extremely inbred, even for the Habsburgs. In fact, his father was also his great uncle. Charles would go on to experience a laundry list of problems throughout his life. He was unable to fully close his mouth, making him drool like a bulldog. His tongue was so large he didn't learn to speak properly until the age of 8. He couldn't walk until 4. He suffered chronic digestive and intestinal problems, and by all accounts, was impotent. That last one's probably for the best. So, one question remains. Was Charles II the most inbred person to have ever lived? That's a pretty hard question to answer. The Habsburgs definitely weren't the only royal family to practice incest, nor was this exclusive to ruling dynasties. Time and time again, we see isolated populations bottleneck, and when faced with no other viable option, they too would inbreed. However, when it comes to the Habsburgs, we have a lot of information, allowing us to take a deeper dive into their lives, and while we may never know for sure if they were the most inbred family in history, they certainly were the most well-known inbred family of all time. Cheers. I'll see you next time.